Hey there, guys. All right, today we are back with some more overly sarcastic productions, and this time we are returning to Blue's History Summarized series. This time, Poland. This is one of his newer history summarized. This one's like a couple years old, so I'm hoping that it's better than some of his older history summarized and history videos that you know I've had we've all had kind of problems with the uh, sort of super summarization that he sometimes does. I feel like can be detrimental to ultimately what he is trying to convey. But let's see if that is the case here with Poland. Obviously, the Polish will think that 12 minutes is not enough time. 12 minutes is not enough time for any country. Don't worry, you Polish. All right, you just calm down. Calm down. Everything will be okay. Let's dive in.
It's rare that a direction on a compass can carry such loaded connotations, and yet, in discussing the history of Europe, East is a complicated word. In the past few centuries, Eastern Europe earned an unfair reputation for backwardsness, poverty, and unsophistication, for reasons we will see. It's also rare for the simple act of reading history to cause me physical and psychological pain. And yet, Poland! For reasons we will see. Our notions of Polish hardship tend to focus on the 1900s, what with the Soviets and the Nazis out and about, but
Mm.
Poland's status as the volleyball of Europe actually goes back quite a ways. Yet
Is Poland the most invaded country in world history? I feel like I've asked this question before and we've had it answered before, but I just can't remember. My guess is yes. I think it's either Poland or it's probably could be France. Just based on depending on probably how broad we want to make the definition of invasion. Or we could go with most conquered country, and then it probably is Poland. Um, yeah, it's gotta be Poland. Um, how they, yeah, it's gotta be,
Yet, despite the
gotta be.
best attempts of half a dozen different empires, Poland would not die, and that is worth investigating. So, to see
They're a
how
bit
Poland's
stubborn.
story unfolds and find out what Lithuania has to do with it, let's do some history. Being well outside of the Roman and Holy Roman empires, we don't get much on Poland until the medieval period, when Duke Mieszko I converted to Catholicism in 966 and began expanding his duchy out across the northern European plain, reaching up to the Baltic Sea and down to the Carpathian Mountains. His son Boleslav I negotiated with Holy Roman Emperor Otto III to grant Poland an independent church governance, adding 3 new bishoprics to their original one and a shiny archbishopric in their capital of Gniezno. To
Ooh,
celebrate,
fancy.
Boleslav promoted himself to king, but made the classic goof of splitting his kingdom between his sons. The hope was to keep government local and
While we are here, Poland's geography has the neat little quirk that it never stops moving. You'll be advised the borders are constantly in flux. Well, that's what happened. They're in the like what is it called? The Great European Plain or something like that. Um, Great Eurasian Plain. I don't know. They're in that big fucking plain area that stretches from like Eastern Germany all the way to the Urals. So like that land doesn't necessitate itself to what other countries get, which is the neat little geographical features as land, right? Southern France's land borders. Uh, where France's borders has always fluctuated the most has been in the northeast along, the Belgium is today, and Alsace-Lorraine region. Their borders with Spain, Italy don't really fluctuate, you know. Uh, uh, you see this with all countries, right? Spain's doesn't really change, because they're surrounded by water. Uh, it changes a little bit with Portugal now and again. So that yeah, it doesn't really change, you know. So yeah, that's geography right there.
responsive, but the result was several functionally independent minor dukedoms who occasionally threw hands at each other. His grandson brought the kingdom back together, but then it got divided again in 1138,
God
and it
damn it.
stayed that way for 2 centuries. A consequence of this was a move away from a single rigid hierarchy to a more dynamic society of tenant farmers, merchants, and nobles spread out across market towns, church lands, and noble estates. Meanwhile, the crown's relative weakness was an opening for the church to educate, govern, and shape Polish culture. It's at this surprisingly early stage that an idea approximating nationalism appears, as the church at the time was the only major body that transcended local politics, and some clergy vocally advocated for a reunified state under the Polish crown. Hang on to the theme of indivisibility, it comes up later. Another big change came in the form of people, as Germans from the HRE and persecuted Jews came to settle in Poland. In 1264, Bolesław
Statute of Kalisz was issued by Duke Boleslaw the Pious, not Boleslaw V, who was king at the time, as I learned just now.
Granted Jews personal freedoms and legal protections, which was a major rarity elsewhere in Christendom. And this welcome got a whole lot warmer during the reign of Kazimierz III, who extended Jewish freedoms to the entire kingdom in 1334 and encouraged more Jews to come to Poland. Kazimierz also gets points for codifying laws, issuing a new standard currency, founding the first Polish university, unifying the political machinery of the kingdom, that's a big one, and recouping some of the land lost a century earlier to the Teutonic Knights in the north and the Mongols in the east. The man was busy, and late medieval Poland didn't slow down. After Kazimierz, the crown passed through his sister to her husband Ludwig of Hungary. That wasn't the best match, as he confiscated some Polish territory for Hungary and bribed the nobles with special privileges to let him do what he wanted. But after him, his daughter Jadwiga became Queen of Poland, and she married Grand Duke Jogaila of Lithuania, which bound the Kingdom of Poland to the Duchy of Lithuania in a personal union. Lithuania was very large, but also very pagan, so as part of the marriage deal, Jogaila...
Damn, it's crazy there that, like, half of, this, I think it's this section here, like, half of modern-day Lithuania is in historical Lithuania. That's crazy.
And his state converted to Christianity. Despite one of history's largest overnight conversions, the two states remained very different, and the Teutonic Knights along the coast saw Lithuania as barbarous pagans, so they tried to invade but lost at the Battle of Grunwald in 1410. In the century after the Union, late medieval Poland saw its first local assemblies of nobles, and in the 1490s, the Szlachta, as they're known in Polish, formed a statewide parliament called the Sejm. By the 1500s, Renaissance arts and ideas made their way north, and when paired with good administration, some nice reforms, and hefty resource exports to Western Europe, Poland was living it up in a golden age. You know Copernicus with the heliocentrism?
Never heard of him.
Yeah, Poland. Now, the personal union between Poland and Lithuania was a familiar political arrangement. Europe made these things all the time, but it was rare they lasted 2 whole centuries. In that span, Lithuania began to resemble Poland in a few key ways, but it was still its own country and opposed to a simple incorporation. So, after some political wrangling, the Union of Lublin in 1569, nice, established a bifederal state with a jointly elected
Polish-Lithuanian state was a republic under the presidency of the king, who reigns but does not govern. That responsibility belonged with the Szlachta and the Sejm.
elected king/Grand Duke and a bicameral parliament of the noble Sejm and a senate. The Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, as it was to be known, had independent local laws, treasuries, and armies for each state. And if this all sounds kind of insane, that's because it is, which is the best part. At a time when the rest of Europe was big on centralized government and royal absolutism, the Commonwealth was a federal monarchy which was elected by a parliament of nobles who themselves accounted for 10% of the population. That's nearly how many people could vote in democratic Athens. To make this outlier...
That is so... Oh, okay, yeah, this is definitely leagues better than his older history summarized videos. Just based off of that line there. That's the kind of shit that I love, that kind of compare and contrast in history, where, right, obviously to our modern day, the sound of, like, the nobility who make up only 10% are the ones that vote in the king. I mean, it's like, okay, what of it? Of course, within the context of wider medieval Europe at the time, that's like a massive deal, but it's also still kind of like, okay, still the nobility controlling things. Well, what difference is that? And then he brings up 10%. That is the same as democratic Athens. That's a great comparison. That just Love it.
Even more extreme, the Commonwealth in the 1600s was one of the largest and most populous countries in Europe, with 11 million people spread out over 400,000 square miles. That included Poles, Lithuanians, Germans, Belarusians and Ukrainians, Jews, and Tatars. And between Catholics, Protestants, Orthodox, 3/4 of the world's Jews, and even some Muslims, it was
3/4?
astoundingly diverse.
Damn.
In part because it stood at the crossroads of several different cultures. But this regional centrality would become dangerous in the next 2 centuries, as basically every empire in a 500-mile radius was keen to grow larger at Poland's expense. Various threats came and went, but sometimes 2 would rear up at once, such as the latter 1650s when Sweden and Russia both invaded Lithuania in what's known as the Deluge. Cities were ransacked and plundered, and the whole Commonwealth briefly shrank to very small. The Commonwealth survived, but between war and ensuing plague, it was gravely wounded, 1/4 of the population dead, vulnerable to outside threats, and
Meanwhile, in the south, Hetman Khmelnytsky led a rebellion of Cossacks against Commonwealth rule, leading to their breakaway and the creation of a new state, the Cossack Hetmanate.
falling into a governing crisis. See, the Republic had become a tragic victim of its own lofty ideology. Wanting to avoid even the slightest whiff of absolutism, the Sejm had a liberum veto which allowed any member of the Szlachta to stop debate. In the best of times, this gave contrarians an instant handbrake on the entire legislative process, but it was also laughably easy for foreign powers to abuse.
Remember how the Szlachta was 10% of the population? Yes. Imagine all legislation needing to pass a unanimous vote. Oh. The liberum veto was a complete disaster for this Sejm.
A single bribe could throw a critical reform right out the window. So by the 1700s, the Sejm regularly failed to make any decisions. This was good news for the empires that encircled Poland, as Russia, Prussia, and Austria all stood to gain from Poland's newfound weakness and wanted to make it their puppet state. In 1764, Russia installed Stanislav II as king, and 4 years later, a confederation of nobles at Bar threw a
Oh, I see. We're just skipping over the Sweden part when Sweden came in and kicked some ass. Okay. Fine. It's fine. It's fine.
rebellion against Russian influence
Just
and
going straight to the
interference.
Russian bit.
So, Russia invaded, and then Prussia and Austria just kind of also invaded while Poland was distracted. By 1772, 1/3 of the Commonwealth was partitioned between the 3 empires. From here, King Stanislav was stuck between doing nothing and letting things get worse, or going rogue and actually trying to fix Poland's problems, which would provoke the empires and make things get worse. To his credit, he went for it, calling a 4-year Great Sejm in 1788 to write out a new constitution for the state. And a really good one, too. They even dropped the liberum veto. But of course, this was way out of line, so Russia and Prussia, and then later Austria, invaded with the explicit goal of wiping Poland off the map. By 1795, the 3 empires had partitioned the entire Commonwealth, and Poland-Lithuania was fully gone. Poof.
Rip.
So, what does one do when an ancestral homeland gets sliced up like a birthday cake? That's a good question. Well, as the 1800s show, you write poetry, paint, and throw a lot of revolts. Poland was right along many Europeans in channeling Romantic-era ideals into a struggle for nationhood, but Poland's situation was a little unique, as they had a nation, and in the cultural sense they still did, but they didn't have a state. In an interesting return to the 1200s, ideology focused on the church as a cultural anchor point for Polishness, and this meant that Poland as a concept narrowed significantly, away from the multi-ethnic and multi-faith society of the Commonwealth and towards what we'd call ethno-nationalism. Yikes. Really running with that Catholicism angle, Polish thinkers conceived of their country as the Christ of nations, which died in the partition as a martyr for other nations and would one day re-emerge. I mean, in hindsight, not strictly wrong. Polish
Yeah, and I mean, it's fucking poetic. It's great propaganda. Absolutely great propaganda. For the targeted audience. But yeah, it's still going to be a bit problematic.
Life under partition differed between the 3 empires. After some short-lived Napoleonic shenanigans, the Congress Kingdom of Poland existed as a vassal state under the supervision and direct governance of the Russian Empire. Later in the century, it was stripped of what autonomy it had and got fully absorbed into Russia. The situation was a little better in Austria, as the Polish-majority province of Galicia was quite poor but decently autonomous, and Galicia became a center of Polish consciousness as the century progressed. By contrast, Prussia, later Germany, had no taste whatsoever for Polish culture, and pushed for Germanization across the whole empire, but onto Poland especially. Germany's slice of Poland gained from the Industrial Revolution, but it was a pretty patchy process overall. And across the board, post hoc justifications for partition relied on harsh stereotypes that have endured to this day. No, guys, you don't understand. It's not that we're greedy, it's that they're bad and don't deserve to exist. Colonization attitudes in my Europe? It's more likely than you think. Despite several attempts at uprising made over the century, none succeeded, and over 3 million Poles emigrated for the United States. It seemed as though the only hope for a revived Poland was the complete collapse of the great European empires. But, as it happened, that would not take long. And
Nope.
as we step into the First World War, I've got
Basically, every sentence out of my mouth for the rest of this video contains at least a university lecture's worth of supplemental information by pure and total necessity. Oh, by pure and total necessity, I am vastly generalizing. I think generalizing 20th century is fine, because that's a lot of stuff, one, that we learn about already. Again, also, it is also stuff that, yeah, can't really cover in a single video.
to work very hard to not fall into the infinite web of tangents and books worth of footnotes for 1900s history. So, World War I in the East was not a
Never
game
heard
of
of it.
trench warfare, but armies constantly on the move causing widespread destruction. The collapse of all three partitioning empires and sympathy among the Allied powers cleared the room for a new Polish state to rise out of.
I don't like the word sympathy here. I would say the desire for a check and balance in this region of Europe by the Western powers is how I view it. Maybe I'm hyper cynical of France and England and the United Kingdom, but I think they deserve the hyper cynicism and mistrust. So that's what I'm gonna say.
The war, but there was constant friction with the other new post-war states, such as Lithuania. Meanwhile, Germany and Soviet Russia hated all of this, so Poland's task of reunifying and running their state also faced external pressure of German posturing and full-on Soviet invasion. In September of 1939, the Nazis invaded Poland and the Soviet Union followed 2 weeks later, partitioning Poland just like the olden days. Russians persecuted class and political enemies, Germans persecuted race enemies. And so the Holocaust happened. Death camps like Auschwitz contributed to the systematic death of 5 million Poles, 3 million of whom were Jewish. They also killed Polish politicians, priests, and thinkers in a bid to exterminate Polish culture. In the face of this utter barbarity, the Polish resistance was among the strongest in Europe, staging 2 mass uprisings and organizing military operations across the continent. Poles played a key role in cracking the Enigma mechanism and were vital pilots in the Battle of Britain. This got marginally better but infinitely more uncomfortable when Russia joined the Allies, and after the war, the Soviets turned Poland into a communist satellite state. Once again, Poland was materially and demographically devastated by the conflict, and the heavy-handed policies of Stalinism weren't the most helpful in the rebuilding process.
Nope.
Over the decades, various reforms were made and undone, and then made again, and so on, and once again, the church acted as a vehicle for Polish unity, this time in opposition to communism. The election of Cardinal Wojtyła of Krakow as Pope John Paul II was an indescribably huge deal for Poland. After the trade union Solidarity started in 1980 and gained a huge following among Polish workers, support from America and the Vatican helped it become the main political opposition against the communist government. And the church facilitated the negotiations to allow Solidarity to participate in the elections of 1989, which broke the communist monopoly on power. Poland's pathway out of communism in the 90s and beyond brought another series of struggles, but it's largely a space they've been before. And that's one of the most confounding aspects of Polish history. There are so many plot lines that seem to echo across time, and there's also so much that couldn't have happened anywhere else. Who could wind up with a government system as absolutely bonkers as the Commonwealth? It's amazing. Polish history can read like a tragedy, because often it is, but the Polish people have more than demonstrated that's no reason for fatalism. Thank you so much for watching. I'd like to apologize for the quality of my Polish pronunciation because, well,
Oh, my pronunciation was worse. He doesn't gotta apologize for shit. That was History Summarized Poland. That was a good video by Blue. I think this is definitely one of his, at least off the top of my head, one of his better History Summarized videos. I think the part in which he chose to oversimplify, for lack of a better word, oversummarize here, which was the 20th century, I think that one's fine because it's a lot of stuff that we've already heard, and it doesn't necessarily need to be repeated. And I think the in-depth information of Polish liberation in the 20th century is really something that I don't think it's necessary for a summary of Poland. I think it's one of those things that you seek out as filler information. If it's something you're extremely curious about, it's something you go towards. But of course, that's just my opinion on probably a lot of modern history. Modern history isn't always the most exciting to me, specifically the 20th and 19th centuries. I'm a I My favorite time period is that period in which like right after the collapse of Rome, uh, um, and before the truly mass Christianization of all of Europe. I really like that 500s to 800s, 700s period. Probably my favorite. It's probably my favorite time period. Just because there's so little known about really the goings on of a lot of parts of Europe, and I'm just curious. Wonder. I yearn for more information about it. But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more. And I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.